The conference room went silent. The county director leaned forward, hands flat on the table, and looked directly at the bank's lead attorney. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said slowly. "Your client has been moving forward with a $42 million development project on land they don't actually have legal access to?" The attorney opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. At the back of the room, an elderly man in a faded flannel shirt sat quietly, holding a single piece of paper in his weathered hands. It was a property tax receipt, $12, paid in 1978, and it was about to shut down the biggest construction project the county had seen in 20 years. Walter Grimm had lived on the same 40 acres his entire life. The land sat just outside the town of Collier's Bend, a quiet rural county in southern Illinois where everyone knew everyone, and most families had been there for generations. Walter's father bought the property in 1952 with money he'd saved working the railroads. It wasn't much: a small farmhouse, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, and fields that were more dust than crop most years, but it was theirs. When Walter's father passed in 1991, the land went to Walter. No mortgage, no debt, just a clear title and a stack of old receipts his father had kept in a metal box under the kitchen sink. Walter never married, never had kids. He worked part-time at the grain elevator in town and spent the rest of his time fixing up the property, keeping it the way his father would have wanted. For nearly 70 years, that land had been home. And then the bank came knocking. It started with a letter. Notice of proposed development zone. Public input requested. Walter didn't think much of it at first. Development proposals came and went. Nothing ever really changed in Collier's Bend. But this one was different. 3 weeks later, a second letter arrived. Final notice, land acquisition offer. The letter was from Garrison Federal Bank, one of the largest financial institutions in the state. They were proposing to build a massive mixed-use commercial complex, retail stores, office buildings, a hotel, right on the edge of town. The project was valued at $42 million, and Walter's 40 acres sat directly in the middle of the planned construction zone. The bank offered him $35,000. Walter read the letter twice, then set it on the kitchen table and stared out the window at the fields his father had worked. He wasn't interested. 2 days later, a man in a gray suit showed up at Walter's door. He introduced himself as Michael Harlow, a land acquisition specialist with Garrison Federal. He was polite, professional, and spoke in the kind of smooth, rehearsed tone that made Walter uncomfortable. "Mr. Grimm," Harlow began, "I know change can be difficult, but this project is going to revitalize this entire county. Jobs, infrastructure, growth. Your land is the final piece we need to move forward." Walter shook his head. "I'm not selling," Harlow smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I understand. But let me be clear, this project is happening, with or without your cooperation. If you refuse our offer, we'll pursue other options." "What other options?" Walter asked. "Legal ones." The meeting ended there. Over the next few weeks, Walter started noticing things. County inspectors showed up unannounced, citing minor code violations on the property, a sagging fence, overgrown brush near the road, a loose board on the barn. Then came a letter from the county tax assessor's office, claiming Walter owed nearly $1,800 in back property taxes. Walter was confused. He'd always paid his taxes on time, every year, without fail. He drove into town and went to the county clerk's office. The clerk, a young woman he didn't recognize, typed his name into the computer and frowned. "I'm sorry, Mr. Grimm, but according to our records, you haven't paid property tax on that land since 2009. "That's impossible," Walter said. "I've got receipts." She looked at him sympathetically but shrugged. "Our system shows no payments. If you have proof, you're welcome to submit it for review. But until this is resolved, the county has the right to place a lien on the property." Walter's chest tightened. He went home, pulled out the metal box from under the sink, and started digging. Inside were decades of receipts, handwritten, faded, some barely legible. His father had kept every single one. Walter found his most recent tax receipt from last year. paid in full, $12, but when he looked closer, he noticed something strange. The receipt wasn't issued by the county, it was issued by the Collier's Bend Independent School District. Walter stared at it for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Then he remembered something his father had told him years ago, back when Walter was just a kid. This land used to be part of the old school commons. That's why the taxes are so low. We pay the district direct. Walter's heartbeat quickened. He pulled out more receipts. 1985, 1978, 1969. All of them were paid to the school district, not the county, and all of them were for the same 40 acres. If the land was still classified under the old school commons system, that meant it was subject to different zoning laws that hadn't been updated since the 1950s. Walter grabbed the box and drove straight to the county courthouse. At the courthouse, Walter asked to speak with someone in the Planning and Zoning Department. He was directed to a small office on the third floor, where a tired-looking man named Ed Callahan sat behind a desk covered in maps and binders. "Help you?" Callahan asked without looking up. Walter set the receipt on the desk. "I need to know what zoning classification my property falls under." Callahan glanced at the receipt, then typed the address into his computer. He frowned. "Huh, that's weird." "What is?" Walter asked. "Your land is listed as Category E2 Educational Commons Reserve. I haven't seen that classification in, hell, maybe 30 years. What does that mean?" Callahan leaned back in his chair and scratched his head. "It means your land was originally set aside for public school use back in the 50s. Technically, it's still under that designation. Which means," he paused, eyes widening slightly, "which means it can't be rezoned for commercial development without a public referendum." Walter felt a rush of adrenaline. "Does the bank know that?" Callahan's expression shifted. "If they did their research, they should. But," he trailed off, clicking through more files. "Yeah, they filed for a commercial zoning variance 3 months ago. It was approved." "How?" Walter asked. "If the land can't be rezoned—" "Because," Callahan interrupted, "the variance was approved based on the assumption that your land was standard residential. Nobody checked the old classification." Walter's hands clenched into fists. "So the whole project is built on a mistake." Callahan didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "You need a lawyer." Walter couldn't afford a lawyer, but he knew someone who might help. Her name was Rebecca Ortiz, a former county attorney who'd retired a few years back and now ran a small legal aid clinic out of her home. Walter showed her everything: the receipts, the zoning documents, the timeline of the bank's pressure tactics. Rebecca read through it all in silence. Then she looked up at Walter and smiled. "They screwed up." "Can we stop them?" Walter asked. "We can try." Rebecca filed an emergency petition with the county board, requesting an immediate halt to the development project pending a full review of the zoning classification. The bank's attorneys tried to dismiss it, but Rebecca brought the receipts: the old land surveys, the original school district charter from 1953. At the hearing, the room was packed. Bank executives, county officials, local residents, reporters. Michael Harlow sat in the front row, arms crossed, confident. Rebecca stood and addressed the board. "The land in question has been classified as Educational Commons Reserve for over 70 years. That classification was never legally changed. Any commercial development on that land is therefore illegal." The bank's attorney shot to his feet. "This is absurd. The zoning variance was approved months ago. This is just a stall tactic." Rebecca turned to him calmly. "The variance was approved based on false information. Your client claimed the land was residential. It's not. And you know what that means." The room went still. The county director leaned forward. "Ms. Ortiz, are you saying the entire development is invalid?" "Yes." Harlow's face went pale. The board called for a recess. 30 minutes later, they returned. The county director cleared his throat. "After reviewing the evidence, this board has determined that the zoning classification for the property in question was incorrectly represented. The commercial variance is hereby revoked." The bank's attorney stood, furious. "This is going to cost $42 million, the director interrupted. "Yes, we're aware." Walter sat in his truck outside the courthouse for a long time after the hearing ended. He didn't feel victorious. He just felt tired. When he got home, he walked out to the old barn and stood there in the fading light, looking out over the fields. His father had died on this land. His mother, too. It wasn't worth $42 million. Hell, it probably wasn't worth the $35,000 the bank had offered. But it was his. A few weeks later, Rebecca stopped by with a folder. "County's officially closed the case," she said. "You're clear," Walter nodded. "Thank you," Rebecca smiled. "You know, most people would have taken the money and walked away." Walter shrugged. Most people didn't grow up with a father who taught them that some things aren't for sale. Rebecca handed him the folder. Inside was the original property deed from 1952, along with a letter from the county officially recognizing the Educational Commons classification. "You might want to frame that," she said. Walter looked down at the paper. His father's signature, still clear after all these years. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think I will. Because in the end, it's not about the money. It's about knowing that no matter how big they are, no matter how much power they think they have, some things can't be bought, and some people can't be moved. If you believe that standing your ground is worth more than any price they offer, this story is for you."